My father, who's now retired but was a teacher, was once walking through the main hall in the school, and he came across the school keeper putting out chairs for a parent-teacher meeting, and he stopped to chat and he said, you know, it's funny, people never sit in the front row. And the schoolkeeper looked at him very seriously and said, is that right? Next time I won't put out a front row. So this is the Beat the Cut session. It's about how to improve services as the only real way of cutting costs. My name is Rob Worth, and I'm a service design consultant. That means I work with the public sector. So I've worked with NHS trusts, local authorities, government departments, government agencies, Welsh Assembly government, worked all across the country to help them look at how they design the services that they deliver to the public. I've written a book called Beat the Cuts, which I think quite a few people have already requested a copy for on the stand down in the exhibition space. The sharp-minded amongst you will have figured out there's a way to ask for one at the end of this session as well. So the public sector, I mean, I think this has been done probably by every speaker who's spoken already, so I'll not go too detailed, but we face a challenge. The government's asking everyone to cut costs. Everyone's facing budget cuts. Just like to ask, is there anyone in the audience who has already had to make cuts in budget in their organisations? That's a good majority of you. And anyone who knows they're going to have to make budget cuts in the next year or so, in the next financial year. Yeah. Well, I mean, the IPPR reported a few months ago, 3 months ago, that actually we've still got 88% of cuts to come. So if we think we've had it bad so far, we're only barely a tenth of the way through what needs to be done in terms of budget cuts being asked for. And at the same time as that's happening, then we're seeing an increase in demand. I think the increase in demand in the NHS due to people living longer, people having more kind of chronic disease for elderly people is well known, but also as treatment gets more, treatments get more complicated, or they can treat more things, then the demand for that goes up. And also as in all the other services, as the economy falters or dips, then people lose their jobs, so they need to apply for certain types of benefits. That also puts stresses on families, so you get families break up with financial stress. So children's services, social services, alcohol dependencies, all these other types of services are feeling the brunt of both the cuts and of the economic situation. So we're kind of feeling it from all quarters at the moment. But the thing we need to think about is the natural reaction, or the natural judgment of how we weigh up cost versus service. And because there's this kind of instinctive way of thinking about it that if you want better service, that's going to cost more money. My argument that is entirely oppositely wrong. And I kind of like to think about it like this, that you have a kind of what I call a broken seesaw with cost on one side and service, hand-usual service, helping hand of service on the other. And the instinctive way, the natural way, if you like, or actually the taught way, even, and the learned way, is that when you're faced with budget cuts, you step over to the cost sides. We get out our budget sheets, we get our income projections, we get out our various spreadsheets, and we go through them and we see what's costing us money. We look at things that are expensive, we look at things that are important, so we look at our list of services we provide, say, in the local council, what are the ones that we have to provide from legislation, what are the ones that are optional, also what are the ones that we think are important. And then we start making decisions like, we'll take 30% off this one and 20% off that one can lose 5%, and this one's going to go completely in half of that one. But the problem with that is that when you start to cut resource in that kind of slightly knee-jerk way, what happens is that you're left with fewer resources to cope with the demand that you already have, let alone the extra demand that's coming your way. When you have fewer resources, then you end up in a situation where you have a bigger propensity to make errors, to have delays, to have backlogs, and to have to redo work that you've already done. So delays, errors, and rework increase. But once you have those delays, errors, and rework, you've still got to do that work. You've got to take the calls. You didn't send me the such and such. I don't understand what this letter means. I booked an appointment and I haven't received anything. The calculation you made is wrong. I want to appeal my decision. All those kind of demands, which Sen refers to as failure demand, or I call wasteful contacts. I think failure is a slightly harsh word to use, but he calls it failure demand. So all that failure demand has to be picked up, redone, and all those processes to deal with the complaints, chasing, has to be done by somebody. And you can even get to a situation where some government agencies have to employ private sector backlog busting companies to come and pick up the waste that is produced from the system itself. So the upshot of all that is that when you push down on costs, service worsens. As service worsens, you have more of this wasteful work to do. And what happens in the end is that costs spring back. And they can go back higher than you'd ever expect. They come back to bite you in the budget, as I like to say. So I think we need to kind of reevaluate what we're doing first. I think what we really need to do is to go back to the beginning and step over to the other side of this seesaw and say, well, actually, what we really need to do is to improve service, because the same logic applies, it just applies in the other direction. But when you improve service, you reduce the delays, you reduce the wasteful work, you reduce the errors, you reduce the rework, and therefore your system is now, not only is it a better service, but it's also cheaper to run. So in fact, when you first improve service, you'll find that your costs will fall, and they'll actually fall much more dramatically than you would predict from a cost-benefit analysis. And it comes down to the way we make people feel. I mean, it's. I know I've got several examples, but I'll tell you about one in a minute. But who in the last month has had some type of bad service from public sector or private sector? They sent you the wrong thing. You had to ring them up because your bill was wrong. Who in the last month has had anything like that? Right. So enough people to make it annoying and boring and frustrating. Why didn't they just do it in the first place? But that stuff is happening all over, and it's happening in the public sector and the private sector. Personal example. My partner is pregnant. She's I hope she's not giving birth as we speak. She's due on the 10th of October. Sorry, it's a little bit risky thing here, but we're having a consultant-led pregnancy because she has some other quite minor conditions that mean that there's a slight more risk in pregnancy. So we went to do our NCT classes where they taught us all about pain relief and different ways of giving birth, and we quite like the idea of having a water birth. But the other thing that she has means that we're not sure whether we're allowed to have a water birth. So we tried to book an appointment with our consultant. And in order to do that, we had to talk to a midwife who didn't really know, so she passed us on to a senior midwife who didn't really know, who passed us on to the consultant secretary, who definitely didn't know, but she couldn't see the consultant's diary. Her secretary couldn't see the consultant's diary. In the end, she had to walk all the way, so this is my partner on the phone there, she had to walk all the way around to to the booking desk to see when the consultant was available. And she came back and she said she could do the 4th or the 11th. This is this month, so this is quite a recent story. 4th or the 11th. There was a bit of a to and fro between my partner and the secretary, and in the end she said, right, the 11th. My partner wrote it down, 3 o'clock on the 11th of September. A few days later, on the 4th, phone call, you missed your appointment. We didn't have an appointment, we booked it for anyway. Can we have an appointment on the 11th? No, the consultant isn't in that day. You see the registrar, so we see the registrar, and he goes through the whole thing, how's the taxi going, how are you feeling, all that kind of stuff. And we say, yeah, everything's fine. What we really want to ask you is are we allowed to have a water bath? Are we allowed to use the pool? I don't know, you have to see the consultant. So you see how, how many hours of, how many minutes have we wasted of midwives, senior midwives, secretaries, booking clerks, registrars, consultants, our time, and we still don't have the answer, and the baby's not going to wait. So you just see how all that waits just to make an appointment. This is not a complaint about medical care, it's just a complaint about the system that enables that care. So we're at a Lean Government Conference. I thought I'd better mention it a little bit. And I say that because Lean's great. There's some really good stuff in Lean, and the more books you read about it, the better. But what you need to be careful about is not to get too enamored with the stuff on the surface, the tool stuff. And I think the message I want you to take away about that I think about Lean is that if you have what Taiichi Ohno said about Lean, which is to get value to the customer and do it quickly, you've got 80% of what Lean is. Because Lean is really a codification of what Toyota are doing. But the thing you have to remember is back in the 50s and 60s, Toyota didn't have books on Lean, they didn't have Lean conferences to go to, they had to make it up for themselves. And all those tools that you see written about in the books or you hear about at conferences, they are all the result of a type of thinking in Toyota that led to those results. When you go and use those results, you have to be careful, do you have the same problem that Toyota did back in 1972? So the trick with Lean is to get this, and you have to unpick it a little bit, which I will do later. Who's the customer, what's value to the customer, and what does quickly mean? Sometimes it's not quickly, sometimes it's when convenient. Most of the time quickly, sometimes when convenient. So we'll just quickly go through a kind of an abstracted, simplified version of why this can be so powerful and where the cost savings can come in, as long as you do the right thing first. So if you think of a system to deliver a service or it could be to deliver a product, I don't mind. But basically you've got demand coming in, you've got processes that deal with this demand, nice simple linear processes. I'll come back to that. And there's the time it takes to do those processes, to complete those processes. But typically, we talk about failure demand, wasteful contacts. Typically, you'll see 50%, if not more. I've seen up to 80% in the public sector of failure demand that's coming in. So if that's, say we'll just be conservative, it's 50%. That means half the demand coming on, therefore half the processes that deal with it are waste. And then when you do, if you've got nice linear processes, you can do value stream mapping. And when you do that, you'll find that the waste in those processes, is more like is 90%, 95%. So the other way of saying that is only 5% or maximum 10% of value that are in your value processes. So if you colour in the waste in grey, you're kind of left with these little spots of value in your system that you might miss if you blinked as you walk past them. So what you end up with when you remove all that waste is something that looks like this in comparison. So you can kind of start to realise where the cost savings come in, because which is more expensive to run that or to run this. And the second thing to think about is if you're thinking about doing things like bringing in an IT system or outsourcing or shared services or anything like that, you have to think about what do you do first. Because write that into an IT system or write this? Which one's going to take the longer, more cost overrun, be more expensive, more buggy? Same thing, outsource. You want to outsource this and manage this contract, or do you want to manage this contract? Same thing for shared services, same thing for... So improving the system is always the first thing to do, no matter what you think the next thing to do is. So that's the fundamental, if you like, is that better service is the only real way to cut cost. And we'll get to some more practical things later on. I'll just give you a little case study. I did some work with a government agency that received about a quarter of its annual returns on paper. So the rest was done via the website. So that was fun. It was quite a nice, smooth process. But they still received like 300 or 400 per day on paper forms, which they then had to transcribe to the website. And they received them into their office, and the actual transcribing was done by an outsourcer. And they asked me to do a cost-benefit analysis of whether they should outsource the half that they still had into the outsourcer. And so I said, well, the first thing you need to do is understand where the value is. And the value was taking the information from forms, putting it on the website so that the general public can see, this is charities, so that the general public can see that these charities are still sold, they're doing good work, they're spending the money they get, all that kind of stuff. So it's for funders and the public. So it's quickly getting that accurate information onto the website. There was the value. But their process involved taking, so they received postbags, then they would take them out, they would batch them into like things of size of charity and year of submission. They would put them on a pigeonhole. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but literally it would go around in circles. So from a pigeonhole to a table to a thing where they did a barcode with a barcode into another batch into another case, and when they had enough, they put it into a box. And then every twice a week, then a truck would come and truck it to the outsourcer, and then we didn't need to look at what happened in the outsourcer, because we realised that actually that was 35 steps, by the way, and actually they only needed 3, which was take a form, type it in, and file it. That was it. That's all we needed to do. And from doing that analysis and understanding what the value was, and changing the process to match, they saved more than, it was between 2 and 3 times what they thought they would have saved by sending it to the outsourcer. And actually what they ended up doing was doing the opposite. They insourced everything, they cut the contract, or they let the contract fade with the outsourcer and brought everything in-house, because now they had a tiny little process. And also, the other reason why they wanted to get the process out of the office was because they wanted to save floor space and take people off the floor above and bring them down, so you give the floor above back to the landlord and save on rent. Or because they took space almost the size of this and took it, basically took it to this place. They could do that as well. So it didn't need to outsource to save the space. It didn't need to outsource to save the money. But guess what? That simple process was much quicker. And it meant that people doing the work understood more about what was on forms and could more easily answer questions to people who were ringing in. So the whole service improved. And they saved money massively. So let's go through some principles that you need to think about when you're looking at what is value. First thing to do is to start with a system. A system really is a kind of a set of interconnected parts that do something. The famous saying is that a system is perfectly designed to do what it does. So if you want to do something different, you have to change it. And the real thing to think about, the system thing is a big kind of academic study. You can read hundreds of books on it and get really confused. I recommend there are a few books that you should read if you're a bit of a reader like I am. But the real core of it is to remember that if you optimize a part of the system, you will sub-optimize the system as a whole. I'll say that again. If you optimize a part of the system, you will sub-optimize the system as a whole. Take this, Russell Ackoff has a nice example about about a car. So we take a box standard saloon car, let's say a Ford Focus. Nice little car, good for going to the shops, take the kids to school, get you to work, whatever. But it's designed as a system. It works well for what it's designed to do. But you could say, right, I'm not happy with the engine performance. And you could go out and optimise the engine. You could go and find, if you get your hands on one, an engine from a Formula One racing car. And if you could manage to make it fit into that car, you'll find that now the transmission can't cope with the power that it's been asked to handle, the chassis won't cope with the vibration that's on there, the speeds that you reach means the brakes aren't good enough and the tyres can't cope with going around corners at that rate. So you end up with almost an undrivable car because you've optimised one part of it. It's the Ford Focus is designed as a system, but equally a Formula One racing car is designed as a system. And they're different, they're both cars, but they're different because they have different purposes. I did some work with a local authority where the finance department managed to persuade social workers to have a longer, more laborious process for filling in expenses claims, which made the finance department run more smoothly, but it took social workers reduce the number of hours they could spend with clients. And if the purpose of the system is to help families and people who need it, what you don't want to do is reduce the amount of time that social workers have. That was a good example of optimising a part of the system and sub-optimising the system as a whole. Lynn talks a lot about waste. I talked already about if you remove waste and then you'll cut costs, that's true. But waste is like the dark. You can't have less waste. So you can't have less dark. You can only have more light. So the light in this analogy is flow. The only way you can't remove waste, you can only have more flow. You remove the handovers, you reduce the handovers, you make work keep flowing along, you're only doing value work as you do it, that's flow. But it's only by putting in flow that you get rid of the waste. It's only by turning on the light that you get rid of the dark. So, identifying waste is a useful technique in order to show the potential, but when you actually come to take action, what you need to do is increase flow, and that will reduce the waste. The next thing you need to get good at is solving problems. But we need to understand there are different types of problems. So there's a Rubik's Cube. And a Rubik's Cube is a hard problem. But we can say some things about it. We can say that it's a bounded problem, what they call a closed system. It's just a cube. You only have to learn how to solve the cube. It's kind of, we understand how it works. You don't need to know exactly the mechanism. If you're kind of like me when I was a kid, I was prizing the thing apart to find out how it worked. But you don't have to understand how the mechanism in the middle works to know exactly, to understand the effect it has. It's predictable. If you start with a cube in one state, you do a set sequence of moves, you'll end up with a second state. If you go back to that thing, you do the same set of moves, you'll end up in the same state, the same second state. It's predictable. You do the same thing again, you'll get the same results. The state of the problem is visible. You don't just have to turn the thing over in your hand to see how far or near you are away from the solution. You can kind of tell when you're getting somewhere. And it's simple. It's a simple problem because of all those things that I've just stated. The other thing is there's only one solution, and we know when we're done. The problem with when we're looking at public services or almost anything else apart from a Rubik's Cube is that we don't know. Almost all those things don't apply. So we have it's an unbounded problem. It's an open system. So delivery of public services is affected by legislation, policy, government, the weather, the economy, all these kind of things that are beyond our control. So we're kind of buffeted by the storms of the world, if you like. We don't really understand it. We don't understand the mechanism in the middle. It's not predictable. If you're going to use a technique, this is where the tools fall down. You go and do a technique in one hospital trust, and you have a certain result. You're going to do exactly the same thing in another hospital trust, and you find that nothing happens or it makes things worse. It's not predictable. You can't see the state. You don't really know what's going on most of the time, and that's part of the thing is to try and make things visible. It's complex because of all the things. And it's not a solved problem. You can go and buy a book or look up on the internet or ask your sister-in-law, she'll teach you how to do it. But this is the public service is an unsolved problem. You don't have a fixed solution you can just apply. You have to figure it out for yourself. And this is why I put up the ball of string or the ball of yarn. You want to fix on a button. There's some useful bits in there somewhere, but you need to let's just say you need to unravel the whole thing in order to get to what you want to. Well, one thing you're not going to do is to pick this ball up and analyse it to find out how it works. Well, what do we do when we pick up a ball of string to try and unravel it? Anyone? Anyone seen string before? Sorry? Try and find the end. And what if you can't see the end? Scissors. Yeah. There's a few policymakers who like using scissors, right? Yeah, you can use scissors. Well, another way to think about it is you start pulling a little bit, don't you? You pull a little bit here and you pull a little bit there, and what do? You kind of think to yourself, well, if you pull this one and it loosens, it feels like it's loosening, and you pull a little bit more. If you pull this one and it feels like things are tightening up, you let that one go and try another one, So it's this kind of trial and error. And so this is what we need to do when we're dealing with these complex systems. We don't have a solution, so we have to have a kind of a structured way of doing trial and error. And this is what Walter Shewhart, who was he taught Deming about statistics. He worked in the Bell Labs in America in the 20s, and along with statistical process control and lots of other things, he wrote down this some people call the Deming cycle. Deming called it the Shewhart cycle, but it's plan, do, study, act. Now there's a problem with this. It's not a problem with the concept. It's a problem with the words. When people see plan, they think 6 months, a year, they'll go through the plan. When they see do, they think, well, implement the plan. And then they've spent so much time on doing stuff, study, they haven't got time for that, so they don't do it properly. And act. Well, act is, we've done the do, well, what's act? So my PDSA on PDSA, if you like, my improvement, is it's still exactly the same, but I call it the health cycle. And he's trying to bring it back to what Shewhart was trying to talk about, which was that you need to have a hypothesis, something you think is true about the world. You need to experiment, or the alternative is examine data. You need to learn from that, and you need to put it into practice. And this is something you can do individually, very fast every day, multiple times in a day. You can do it as a team, and that might be slightly bigger experiments where you're doing a couple a week. Do it as a department, do it as a division, do it as a service, do it as an organisation, do it as a country. And it is a cycle, and the cycles overlap. So the most important thing is that you have your hypothesis, you run the experiment, you learn, and you find out, like I say, trial and error. If your hypothesis is incorrect, then you don't put it into practice. If it was correct, that things have improved, then that's fine. Well done. Start again, but you have to realise when you start to do this kind of thing that you are allowed to fail. You are allowed to have a wrong hypothesis, and there's no blame attached to thinking something might be true and then testing it. And it's the hypothesis is trying to do something along the lines of, if we do such and such, then we'll improve customer value, we'll improve how the system communicates, we'll increase flow, we'll reduce variation. Variation is something I haven't got time to go into today, but there's some stuff in the book about it. and we increase the visibility of the state of the system, or more than one of those things. So that's what you're trying to do. So that's so another principle is you need to learn about your system, and the way to learn is to act on it with hypotheses, experiments. The next principle is motivation. Sometimes all you need are a few words of encouragement. This is the caption. This is the idea that there are two types of motivation. There are the ones that we easily understand, like better pay, bonuses, more interesting projects, and those are the positive ones. So then you have the negative ones. You get told off, you get demoted, you get made redundant, lose privileges, whatever. These are all extrinsic motivators. They come from the outside. Praise is another one. And if you read Alfie Cohen, he pulls to a book called Punished by Rewards. He pulls together all the scientific evidence that shows that extrinsic motivators, whether positive or negative, concentrate the mind on the reward or avoiding the punishment, and the process of doing the thing. He describes it, because of doing the thing you're supposed to do, it gets lost. He describes it as it comes in the form of do this and get that. And what happens is that doing this kind of gets put to the back, and the getting that or avoiding the punishment becomes the primary objective. Just look at the blowing up of the economic system, just to see that financial people seem to be so concentrated on getting. If we talk about the mortgage industry in America, they were so concentrated on getting that premium for mortgages that can never be paid back. They were happy to do that in the short term. They're happy to get that, and eventually the whole system blew up, and they were worse off than when they started. Some of them aren't worse off, unfortunately, but lots of them were. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is that you work on intrinsic motivation. That's motivation not from the outside, that comes from within. So we're looking at things like joy in work. Dominic talked about joy in work. Some people like to solve puzzles, that kind of intellectual curiosity, working as a team, helping others, feeling like you're doing something important, putting something back into society, into community, into the world. I often notice as I go around organisations and talk to people, you have people who resist a little bit about change, which is fine. And you often find out that they're the ones who run their local operatic society, or take the scouts on camps, or they do the finance for their local football team. All of which are kind of time-consuming, sometimes boring jobs, but for which they don't get paid and probably cost them money. But they're happy to do it because they feel like they're doing something worthwhile, and it's interesting. I just said it was boring. Yeah. So the very same people who resist doing something extra in work sometimes will be the most likely people to go and do something extra when they get at home. So if we could just take that intrinsic motivation that they have outside work and bring it into work, we'd have a massive potential. So what we're saying is if you stop the extrinsic motivation and you tap into intrinsic, you can try and reduce the resistance. And the way that you tap into that, Dan Pink in his book Drive, A Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, talks about this idea of autonomy, purpose and mastery. I kind of equate it to the fire triangle. You can't have a fire without oxygen, heat and fuel. If you take away any one of those things, then when the fire goes out, you can't start it in the first place. So you have autonomy, which is you're in control of the way that you do the work that you do. Mastery is that you're allowed to get really good at what you do. You take that joy in work. Purpose is that you feel like you're making a contribution in whatever field you're happen to be in. So if we can link those three things, then we'll tap into that intrinsic motivation, and actually people will want to change more than we're able to cope with them, keep up with them sometimes, if you get it right. They push you. But we've been talking, we've been talking about what I call kind of simple linear transactional systems. And there are very few of them in the public service. I think probably a refuse collection. They don't need to know me in order to collect my rubbish. All I need to do is put my bin out on the correct day, and they come and get it. It's a fairly simple process. There might be lots of interesting things about logistics and how you route trucks and all that kind of stuff, how you route dust carts around and the recycling vans. But broadly, it's a kind of fairly linear transactional process. And almost, then we can look on the other side, the other end of a continuum, if you like. You've got a transaction over here and something else on the end, what I call complex human processes, where children's services, social care, those kind of processes, where actually you almost have to spawn a new little system to look after this person or this family who's now presented as having some need. It's almost like in order to cope with these really complex processes, you need to have a meta system above which then you can create little systems. So one person might have mental health issues, so they need, but that also means they need to help claim benefits, and they need mental health services and some sort of help with housing. But then another person comes along, they have a family, they've just lost their job, they might need to claim different types of benefits, child benefits, and have some help with on-the-job training. But they might all present to the same place, and you need some way of creating a little system around them where they're at the centre, and the web of value is centred upon them, as opposed to having set processes, linear processes that you put them through, which probably won't do the job very well. But then there's a continuum. So it's not just that you're being transactional, it's not just that you're complex human, it's actually that oftentimes you're somewhere along the line, or a mixture. So like I say, it's about creating systems that are based around people and understanding their needs on this end of the continuum. So just a quick recap of the principles we've just gone through, and a couple of others that I haven't. So the real core about this is, as I said, to think about customer value. And just as I don't like the word customer, it's just hard to think of another word that encapsulates all your, if you have patients, call them patients, if you have tenants, call them tenants, if you have passengers, call them passengers. Customers just kind of a bit of an annoying catch-all. Think about the system, the parts versus the whole. Think about putting in flow, that's what will get rid of your waste. Make the work state visible. Make sure that you concentrating on learning, and help cycles is the best way I've found to do that. Acting on the system is the way you learn about it. And we haven't really talked about measures or policy. Have good measures, don't have targets. Measures that are to do with the system and the whole system measures that are to do with measuring customer value. But you understand variation. Again, something I haven't quite got time to go into. And then you tap into intrinsic motivation of both the public and of staff, instead of relying on extrinsic motivation, which is the easy way. And you kind of have a feel for whether your service is transactional, whether it's complex or somewhere in between, or a mixture. Because that last one is important about what you do next. So if we think about what kind of a perfect change program might look like, if in a perfect world, change would be natural. It would be the kind of what to do next would be evident. It would just feel right. It would be simple. You just go and do it. Everybody would be keen to get on and do it, and they'd all agree about what we should be doing. The results will be easily measurable, and they'd come quickly. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world, so what we more often see is that the change seems a bit contrived or artificial. I sometimes see the change seems more complicated than the system is trying to improve. That it's highly complex. It's hard to get your head around the system, the change that allows the system, and because of this artificiality and the complexity, people protest, people resist, because they disagree about what to do, or they disagree that we need to do anything. How long is a piece of string? Sometimes these things are not very measurable. Sometimes it's more kind of it feels right as opposed to you can measure this particularly, and it can come slowly. Improvements can come slowly if they ever come at all. So it's applying those principles that we just talked about, and also having some sort of idea about leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I don't really mean about leaders as in chief executives or prime ministers or whatever. I'm talking about leadership that can be applied at every level. And it's about knowing the purpose. It's about knowing the purpose of what your organisation or what you're there to do, and whether that actually ties in with what's the customer need, the direction that you're going to go. Hopefully you're going to go in the direction of improving services, not cutting costs. Having some sort of a theory behind what you do as opposed to just guessing, so that hopefully some of this theory will enable you to have better hypotheses when you come to run your experiments. So you're not just kind of, I remember listening to a consultant at a conference once, and he said, if you don't know what to do, count anything. Count anything. And he gave an example of, in surgery, they didn't know what to do one day, so he said, well, count anything. They said, well, let's count the number of swabs we use in during each operation. And I kind of said to him after, well, what did that teach you? And he said that they use a lot of swabs. So have a little bit of theory that will enable you to have a bit more of an intelligent idea, and some sort of method. So help cycles and thinking about value and flow is part of the method. Think about the whole system, and I think one of the most important things about leadership is to have clarity about your thing. When somebody asks you what your purpose is, and you tell them, the next person who asks you, you should really say the same thing. So that's about being consistent. Politicians do this very well. It's a kind of a funny thing, isn't it? They just repeat the same thing over and over again. The Conservative coalition talk about since they've gone into power, we're clearing up the mess that the last lot left us. And they've said on every news night, on every question time, you may agree with that or you may not, but I'll tell you what it is, it's clear and it's consistent. Labour have theirs, the squeeze middle. I don't think that's so clear, but it's still consistent. They still keep talking about it. So I'm not saying be a politician, but I'm saying be clear and consistent about what you're saying, your purpose and your direction is, when you're communicating to staff and to anyone else. And the leadership should inspire action, and that's why I say that you don't have to be in the top job to get stuff done. You can do this at the level that you're at. You run a team, you're in a team, you run a division, whatever. Let's start from where you are. Because none of these things are dependent on having power or influence. You can do all of these things from wherever you are at the minute. It's better if you have it, and you can really generally apply it to the whole system all at once, but start from where you are. So the question becomes, that's nice, but what do we do first? Got all these things, there's a million and one things we could look at. So here's my concrete suggestion of what you do when you get back to work tomorrow morning. Is that you think about your sphere of influence, who those people who you're most strongly influence, who you can most strongly influence, or who people below you have a quite strong influence over, your peers who respect you have a certain amount of influence, and maybe some people above as well will listen to what you're saying. Have a very quick meeting, half an hour, no more, you don't need it, and you need to ask 3 questions which will inspire, which will lead to action. The first question is, who's the customer? Are they young? Are they old? Are they male? Are they female? Are uneducated? Are they business people? Are they farmers? Are they unemployed? All these questions. You get a picture of people. And sometimes you want something that helps us to get an actual picture. Just go on the internet and you can get copyright-free pictures of people. Get a picture of someone. And give them a name. Look at the name. Who's the customer? And what do they need? What are we here to do for them? What would they say? If you asked them, what do you want us to do? What would they say? And then what you want to do is to go out into your service and find out how well you serve them. So this is where this continuum comes back in. Simple linear transactional on one end and complex human on the other end. So John 7 says study demand, and that's great if you have a simple linear transactional process. But if you're on the other end continuum, somewhere in the middle or a mixture, just automatically studying demand. One, it can be difficult because the demand isn't discrete and evident. Like something with chronic disease, where's the discrete demand there? If they're having this for years and they're going through different phases of remissions and complications and all that kind of stuff. Really, you need to create that little system around them and understand their value. So the way you gather the need is different depending on the type of service that you offer. So that task should take a week, 2 weeks tops. If it's taking more than 2 weeks, then you're not. The questions aren't simple enough. People haven't quite understood. Because you need an answer that's good enough. You don't need the perfect answer. I went to a thing like this week where there was a manager in a hospital. They just spent 3.5 years putting a data analysis system into how they run theatres, surgery in that hospital. And they're only just getting around to how do we present this data to surgeons. 3.5 years, 5 analysts. This study just doesn't need to be that long. The data was great, it was fantastic, they could do everything with it. But they don't need to. You just have to have a good enough idea. And that will inspire your first hypothesis or your first dozen hypotheses, which you then go and test and you refine. And then you might find you need other data. The next thing you do, once you have an understanding, and everybody has a clear understanding of where the system is, you start putting your health cycles. Every team has a 10-minute meeting in the morning, a stand-up meeting, and each meeting says, well, what are our new hypotheses? What experiments are we going to do? How are the experiments going that we're running in the middle of it a minute? And what did we learn from experiments that we have just finished? And how we can put this into practice. So you're running multiple experiments at the same time. The teams doing it together. They're helping each other with their hypotheses, their experiments, everything. So they're improving in their little way, thinking about the system. And you're running these at divisional level, etc. But what you don't do is start a program, because if you start programming, you'll learn anything you can stop. Don't create a project office. Responsibility needs to be with the people who are directly responsible for delivering the service. Don't nominate champions. Champions will emerge. The team will put their hands up. Don't have excuses. Oh, we've already got a program, a review program of our IT, review program of our blah blah this and that. So you need to get past that. Not say that's easy, by the way. Don't write reports. Do something. Don't do reviews. Same thing really. Don't benchmark others. It's a waste of time. Learn from your own system. Learn by running your experiments. And the second thing is like I say, start from where you are, start small, and it will grow. If you can go straight in and achieve executive level, do this on a system-wide basis, it will be much quicker, much easier, and you'll be able to have a community of people who are doing it all at the same time who can help each other along. So like I say, start from where you are, and you never know where you're going to end up. So just to, I've gone slightly over, I apologise for that. But just to reiterate, the core idea that underpins all of this is that better service costs less, and it's the opposite the way around. Improved service and cost will fall. So thank you for listening. That's me. If you like a copy of the book, there's more in the book than I've been able to talk about today. There's a couple of bits that I've talked about today that are not in the book. you'd like to request a copy of the book, forms are on your seat, please fill them in, and I think Paris at the back will be happy to collect them. So thank you very much for coming today. I've slightly run over, so I don't think we've quite got time for questions, but thank you very much.